3 simple ways to leave avoidance in emotional chaos. Without regret, let's talk about avoidance, the emotionally unavailable, the ones who always keep you just close enough to hope. These are about you not, but far enough to hurt. You've tried understanding them, fixing them, waiting for them. But here's the truth. People who keep you in emotional need more chances. They need consequences. Now, this isn't about revenge. This is about power. Yours. And it's about peace. Also yours. So let me give you 3 simple but powerful ways to leave an avoidant in emotional chaos. Not to hurt them, but to finally free yourself without regret. When you walk away from someone who is emotionally avoidant, the instinct for many is to make it a scene. We want them to understand. We want closure. We think if we just say the right thing, if we express ourselves perfectly, maybe then they'll finally get it. Maybe they'll finally care enough to change. But avoidants don't respond to clarity. They respond to confusion. They are more impacted by the absence of noise than they are by a well-delivered speech. That's why walking away quietly, rather than dramatically, is the first and most powerful move you can make. When you leave quietly, you break the script. Avoidants often expect a chase. They're used to someone getting frustrated, throwing around big emotions, and still sticking around afterward. They count on that pattern. But when you calmly step out of their orbit with no emotional performance, you introduce silence where they expect noise. You remove the energy source they've been feeding off. No yelling, no over-explaining, no one last try. Just space. And that space is jarring for someone who's been used to emotional entanglement without real accountability. This isn't about being cold or manipulative. It's about reclaiming your dignity. Dramatic exits might feel cathartic in the moment, but they often leave you doubting yourself later. You wonder if you were too harsh, too reactive. But when you exit with calm, a silent unfollow, a soft goodbye, no need for one last emotional negotiation. You walk away in alignment with your self-worth. You stop arguing for your value and start acting like it's already understood. It also flips the emotional pressure back onto them. See, avoidants don't like direct confrontation, but they also don't like being ignored, especially not by someone who used to make them the center of their emotional world. When you go quiet, you rob them of the chance to feel superior, to feel like they pushed you away and won. Instead, you disappear without warning, without a breakdown, and that unsettles them. It creates emotional chaos. Not because you caused harm, but because you stopped engaging in the cycle they depended on. More importantly, silence gives you space. When you leave quietly, you're not only disrupting their comfort, you're creating yours. You stop pouring your energy into a relationship that doesn't nourish you. You stop trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. Use your silence to refocus on what matters, your own healing, your own growth, your own next chapter. People often think that quiet means weak, but in situations like this, it's the strongest move you can make. It takes restraint, it takes clarity, it takes self-respect. Anyone can scream as they walk out the door, but the ones who truly move on, the ones who leave a lasting impact, are the ones who don't look back, don't beg for recognition, and don't need an audience. One of the most common mistakes people make dealing with avoidant partners is thinking they need to explain themselves more. If only they could find the right words, the perfect tone, the most logical explanation, then maybe the other person would finally see their worth and step up. But this constant effort to be understood is exhausting, and worse, it's usually wasted. Because someone who's emotionally avoidant isn't struggling to hear you. They're choosing not to act on what you're saying. And no matter how much you raise your voice or plead your case, it won't change that fundamental truth. The real shift begins when you stop trying to get them to meet your needs and start focusing on meeting your own. That means elevating your standards, not your voice. It means deciding that your time, your energy, and your love are too valuable to keep offering to someone who treats them like they're optional. It's about no longer accepting the bare minimum simply because it's packaged with charm or chemistry. That might feel harsh, especially if you're someone who believes in compassion and understanding. But compassion without boundaries is self-abandonment. Raising your standards isn't about ultimatums or being hard to please. It's about knowing what consistent love looks like and being unwilling to settle for anything less. It's about choosing relationships where communication is clear, presence is consistent, and affection doesn't feel like a reward you have to earn. When you start living from that place, your energy shifts. You no longer chase, you choose. And the people who can't meet you there, they naturally fall away because the game of emotional push and pull doesn't work on someone who's stopped playing. For an avoidant, this shift is disorienting. They're used to people bending over backwards to keep the connection alive. They're used to controlling the pace, deciding when to come close and when to pull away. But when you start saying no to inconsistency, when you're reaching out first, when you no longer validate their avoidance by tolerating it, that's when they feel the change. You haven't yelled, you haven't begged, you've just stopped lowering yourself to stay connected. That's unsettling, that's power. Most importantly, this approach protects your peace. When you spend less time trying to get someone to love you right and more time standing in your own worth, everything changes. You stop second guessing yourself. You stop obsessing over mixed signals. You stop feeling like you're too much just for wanting the basics: communication, effort, emotional presence. Suddenly, it becomes clear you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. You don't need to get louder. You need to get clearer. You don't need to argue harder, and you need to walk taller. When you elevate your standards and start acting accordingly, you stop settling for crumbs and start attracting people who can offer the full meal. This is not about control. That's about choice. And it's one of the most powerful choices you'll ever make. One of the most damaging things about being entangled with an avoidant is how easily you begin to question your own worth. You start to internalize the inconsistency, the hot and cold behavior, the lack of emotional presence, and somehow make it about you. Maybe if you were a little more patient, a little less needy, a little more chill, then they'd finally show up the way you need. But the real tragedy isn't just what they do, it's how much of yourself you lose trying to decode them. At some point, you stop being the main character in your own life and start revolving around someone who can't even decide if they want to be in your orbit. That's why reclaiming the narrative is essential. Because when you're involved with someone emotionally avoidant, the relationship often becomes a story about them. Their trauma, their fear of intimacy, their inconsistent behavior, their timing. You become the supporting character in a movie that revolves around their growth or their resistance to it. You tiptoe around their moods, justify their emotional absence, and tell yourself to understand where they're coming from. But what about where you're going? What about your needs, your joy, your sense of direction? Reclaiming the narrative means shifting that spotlight where it belongs, on you. This doesn't mean you deny the reality of their emotional patterns. It means you stop centering your life around them. You stop defining yourself by how they treat you. You stop measuring your value by whether they choose you. Instead, you start writing a different story. One where your standards matter, your needs are valid, and your healing doesn't require their cooperation. That shift isn't just empowering, it's transformative, because when you change the story, you also change the outcome. This isn't about pretending you never cared or acting like you were never hurt. It's about taking the pain and using it as a pivot point. A moment where you decide that the chaos and confusion they've created no longer gets to dictate your next chapter. You rewrite the script. You decide that your life is going to be about emotional clarity, not emotional games. You build a life so rich in purpose and peace that someone who thrives on avoidance can't exist comfortably in it. And ironically, that's when they often come back. When they feel your shift, your detachment, your energy turning inward. But by then, you'll see it differently. You'll realize they were never the missing piece. You were just momentarily distracted from your own story. And the beauty is you get to take that story back. You get to outgrow and rise without needing their validation. That's not revenge. That's alignment. Reclaiming the narrative doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means refusing to be defined by it. You stop reliving the moments they confused you and start creating moments that inspire you. You stop seeking closure from them and start giving clarity to yourself, because the most powerful thing you can do after someone tries to shrink you is expand. Unapologetically and fully. The moment you stop making someone else the center of your emotional universe is the moment you start truly healing. When you're caught in a dynamic with an avoidant, it's easy to forget this. You find yourself overanalyzing every text, every silence, every fleeting moment of connection, trying to decode what it all means. You wait for the next breadcrumb of affection and make it mean everything. Without even realizing it, your emotional well-being becomes tethered to their inconsistency, their moods, their decisions. They become the gravitational force around which your life orbits. But you weren't meant to revolve around someone else. You were meant to be the sun, the source of light in your own world. Changing the story of who you place at the center of your life is one of the most profound acts of self-respect you can commit to. It's not about being selfish. It's about coming back to yourself. You start to realize that you don't need someone to complete you. You need someone who can meet you. And before that can happen, you have to meet yourself. That means nurturing your passions, investing in your growth, showing up for your own emotional needs with the same urgency and care you used to show up for theirs. When you've spent so long making someone emotionally unavailable the focal point of your thoughts, your time, and your energy, it can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, to refocus on you. There might even be guilt, but that discomfort is a sign you're stepping out of a pattern, and that's where real change begins. You're breaking the habit of self-abandonment. You're telling your nervous system, it's safe to choose me. Taking back the center means you no longer allow their inconsistency to define your self-worth. Their silence no longer means you're unlovable. Their withdrawal is no longer your cue to chase. Instead of asking why they didn't choose you, you start asking, Do I even want someone who treats connection like a threat? The more you show up for yourself, through boundaries, through reflection, through action, the more the emotional fog begins to lift. And here's the irony: when you stop giving them the central role in your life, it often rattles them. Because avoidants rely on being the emotional priority while giving the bare minimum in return. When they feel you shifting, when the texts go unanswered, when the emotional energy you used to pour into them disappears, they notice, they might even come back. But by then, your clarity will be louder than their mixed signals. Your story should be about your growth, your peace, your forward movement, not their fear of intimacy, not their inability to choose. You have chapters ahead filled with purpose, passion, love, and connection, the kind that doesn't make you guess. But to get there, you have to write them. And to write them, you have to stop editing yourself to fit someone else's broken storyline. Because the real plot twist isn't them changing. It's you realizing you never needed them to begin with. Regret often comes from abandoning yourself, your values, your intuition, your boundaries. It doesn't come from walking away from someone who refused to meet you emotionally. It comes from all the moments you stayed when you knew better, all the times you hoped they would change, and all the energy you poured into proving your worth to someone who never fully showed up. That's why the most powerful exit from a relationship with an avoidant is one done with clarity and peace, not anger or resentment. When you leave with your dignity intact, when you leave without begging or needing them to validate your decision, you walk away without regret. Many people fear leaving because they're afraid they'll miss the other person. And you might, but missing someone doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. Missing someone is a natural response to the loss of what felt familiar, even if it was painful or inconsistent. Regret, however, is deeper. Regret is what creeps in when you betray yourself repeatedly, when you ignore red flags, when you let someone treat you as optional while you made them a priority. And over time, regret becomes a quiet ache that's harder to heal than the temporary sting of letting go. Walking away without regret requires you to stand firm in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It means accepting that not everyone has the emotional capacity to love you in the way you deserve, and that no amount of patience or empathy will change someone who is not ready or willing to grow. You can understand someone's trauma without becoming collateral damage to it. You can have compassion for their fears without staying in a cycle that drains your spirit. And when you finally realize that your peace matters more than their potential, you stop sacrificing your mental and emotional health for the hope of something that never quite materialized. Avoid you not. Avoidants often don't understand what they've lost until it's gone. And when you leave with self-respect, when you don't lash out, don't beg, don't explain over and over again, they feel that absence more deeply than any speech could make them feel. You were predictable in your presence, in your love, in your support. Now, your silence and emotional withdrawal become the consequence of their avoidance, and you're finally free, not just from them, but from the cycle of self-doubt and overfunctioning that came with trying to love someone who wasn't emotionally available. You don't owe anyone your continued presence when they consistently fail to meet your needs. You don't owe anyone closure when you've already given chance after chance. The only thing you owe is to yourself, and that debt is paid through choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-love over emotional scarcity. You can walk away without hatred, without revenge, without a need to make them suffer. You walk away clean, clear, and grounded. And that kind of exit, that's the kind that leaves no regret, only relief. Thank you for showing up, for choosing growth, and for being willing to face the hard truth with courage and honesty. Whether you're walking away, still untangling, or already free, know this: you are not too much. You were just in a place that offered too little. I appreciate your time, your energy, and your openness to hear these words today. Can't about you not. I hope they gave you the clarity you needed and the strength you forgot you had. Take care of your heart, guard your peace, and never forget, the most powerful love story you'll ever live starts with you. Thank you, and goodbye for now.